Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I am so excited to do this video today. I've actually been waiting to do it for a couple of weeks, but we're doing my March recap, all the books that I read in March, and I actually had some strong opinions about the books that I read and really enjoyed some of them, and I couldn't wait to tell you about them. So some of them I really disliked so much that on my Instagram I talked about them. So make sure you're following me there because sometimes I'll ask questions about what I'm reading and just get y'all's opinion also, which is fun to do. So this month I feel like was a really good month for reading. There were a couple books that I finished that I was reading at the end of February, and of course there's some right now that I'm reading that I had hoped, like last week if you watched my video I talked about Josiah's Reformation, and I'd hoped to finish that by the end of March, but unfortunately I did not. But I still have a lot of other good ones. So if you've watched my other recap videos, which I'll link them in the description, we go through my reading stats. So like how many books did I read, how many pages, and then I'll talk about which one's my favorite and give you like a little review of each one. So I've got my notebook and I've got my laptop to look at all my reviews and just let y'all know what I thought of these books. So for stats, I read 8 books this month, which is exactly the same as last month. However, I only read 2,229 pages, which is less than last month, but I think that has to do with the fact that I only listened to 2 audiobooks, which is super weird, but I think I got on a kick where I listened to like a lot of sermons, so I wasn't listening to as many audiobooks, and one of them I just finished today. So yeah, I don't really know what happened to my listening to audiobooks. And then I read 6 paper books, obviously. So yeah, less pages. Last month I think was somewhere, it was like almost 3,000. And then this month was only 2,200. But it was still a really good month. A lot of them were shorter books, but I enjoyed them a lot better than some of the other ones. And it's more fun to just be able to get done with a book and count it off on your list, and you feel very accomplished. So my favorite out of all of the books was in the House of Tom Bombadil, and then my least favorite, if you watched on Instagram, you definitely know which one's my least favorite, is The Great Gatsby. I read it because a lot of people had told me that they really liked it, and some people said, oh, it was really terrible, so I wanted to read it and see, why are there so many differing opinions on it, and yeah, definitely I'm in the camp of it's a terrible book, and I don't know why people like it. Honestly, there are people that I follow that say it's one of their favorite books, and I don't understand. I see no redeeming quality to it besides the fact that it very, very well portrays what America was like at the time. So I don't know, I thought it was weird. And then all the other books that I read this month, Whose Waves These Are, Moon Over Manifest, A Time to Speak, God's Grace in Your Suffering, Sinking City, and also Cold Comfort Farm. Yeah, those were all the books that I read, and let's go through each one of them, and I'll kind of tell you what I thought about each one, and I'll give you a little review of them so you can see if you would like to read any of these books. So first, let's start off with the ones that I actually read in print. It looks like I'm missing one. Which one am I missing? Oh, I don't have Sinking City because we finished that as a family this month. First, Moon Over Manifest. So this is a YA book. I guess this was the first book that Claire Vanderpool wrote, but then maybe last year it came out, I'm not really sure. She wrote a book called Navigating Early, which I listened to, and a bunch of people I know listened to, and they really enjoyed it. It wasn't really my type of book. It was kind of weird and imaginative, and I don't really like fantasy that much. But Moon Over Manifest, I actually liked a lot better. It was a little bit difficult for me to get into, but I did enjoy it near the end. So as far as content goes, there's mentions of alcohol and stuff. So it's set during the Great Depression time, during the temperance movement and prohibition and all that. So it does talk a lot about it, a bar and bootleggers, but obviously nothing bad or not kid friendly. And then there's a Catholic nun in here, which she's really funny. And then there's a diviner, which that was the biggest problem that I had with this book. It's one of those books where it was kind of questionable, the morality of it as you're going through it, because there's this diviner and it's oh, well, is she really a diviner or is she just kind of making this up? And it doesn't really make that clear until the end of the book, so I felt there was too much iffiness to it. But overall, I thought it was a really fun book. I think I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. It's mostly about immigrants coming in and how they lived in, so one part, it's one of those books that flips back and forth, so one part's in 1918 and one part's in 1934, I believe. and there's a girl, and she's trying to figure out like who her father was and how her father connects to the story that she's finding out about the town. So it's a really fun book. At first I didn't think I was gonna like it because I don't actually really like books about kids. But this did end up being a really fun book, and I would actually really recommend this if you're studying something about World War II, the Great Depression time period. This is a really fun book to read. And then next, so God's Grace in Your Suffering by David Powlison. So I've listened to Good and Angry, which I talked about that in my January recap video, and I really enjoyed that. That's also by David Powlison. So this is like a counseling book, and has a really interesting approach. So it goes through How Firm a Foundation, the hymn that was written, and it uses a stanza or a verse of the hymn, and it kind of expounds on that using scripture and encouraging you in your sufferings. So the first chapter was actually probably, I don't know, I really like the introduction in the first chapters. The first chapter is really short, but it has like all of these questions, and it asks you like, what is the hardest thing you're facing right now? What are you afraid that you might have to go through someday? Where do you need help? Where do you need wisdom? So kind of just like thinking through it on your own, and then writing that down, and then reading the book with that perspective in mind. Like, how does this apply to what is currently going on in my life? So I really enjoyed it and was really encouraged by it, and I will definitely be picking this up again sometime whenever there's a suffering that I'm going through. It's only like 120 pages, so it was a super quick read, and I think it would be very helpful to anyone who needs encouragement of just how God is faithful and He is our foundation. Even when other things are falling apart, like He will always be there, and we have the end to look forward to of glorification. So I would totally recommend that you go read this book. Ooh, and then, so the two classic books that I read this year were books that I didn't really like that much. So we have Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. So there's two groups of people. There's people who have never heard of this book before and are like, why is it even a classic? And there's people who think it's hilariously funny and it is one of the best classics they ever read. So I had actually never heard of it before until someone on my Goodreads was one of the people who thought it was hilarious and wanted everyone to read it. So let me find my review. So as I was reading it, I thought, okay, like based on the introduction, I thought this might be a really funny book. I think I will enjoy it because it's kind of making fun of the other books that were written at the same time, which is around the 1930s. Yeah. So she's making fun of like the British rural books that were written in the 1930s. Like the girl goes to the country and she kind of fixes everything there, finds someone to marry happily ever after. So she's kind of making fun of that in this book. So as I was reading it, it just got worse, and I was going to only give it 2 stars because it was just weird. I felt like you kind of feel like you're left out of the inside joke if you've not read any of the other books that were written in the 1930s, which honestly I haven't. I read books mostly from the 19th century for classics, so I hadn't really read any of the books that she was making fun of, so it kind of felt like you were being left out of an inside joke a lot of the time. Like, you know that's supposed to be funny, but you don't know why it's funny and why you should be laughing. So that was pretty annoying to me as I was reading it. Also, there was a lot of innuendo in there, especially between, like, or just 1 or 2 characters. They just make it very, like, stereotypical man, and it was weird, and I didn't like it. And then also the author, she thinks that her writing is very funny, so she puts, like, little stars on the sentences that she thinks are great. Just overall, the feeling of the book and the attitude was not something I would like. So I actually did end up giving it 3 stars, though, because the ending was so sweet and just like this perfect fairy tale ending, and when everything just comes together so pleasantly, like no matter how horrible the book was leading up to that, you just feel this very pleasant feeling whenever everything is happy and everything has been tied up, and it's really great. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this book, but I did like the ending, and I'll probably be selling this back to Half Price Books. Okay, and then the next classic I read was The Great Gatsby. Pretty much I have nothing good to say about this book. I think I might have given it 2 stars because it's a classic, maybe. The only thing I have good to say about F. Scott Fitzgerald is like his description of the summer and just like how hot it was. That was really like, it stood out and it was very descriptive. and I did like that aspect of his writing. Maybe like that was a good writer, but mostly it was almost like the stream of consciousness type writing, which I feel like just keeps coming up in all these books that I'm reading, and it's something I really don't like when it just doesn't match together and you're like jumping from one thing to another, and that's something I really don't like in books. And also you feel like you're kind of given the end of the story before you're given the beginning, not the whole story, like the little things that are happening in between. It'll tell you something and then it will go back and explain it, and it just makes it really choppy and weird, and I did not like The Great Gatsby, and it's just all very tragic and nothing goes right, and of course you see just how horrible it is to live a sinful lifestyle and like what results from that. But I would not want to read, I mean, like, I already know that, so why would I waste my time reading a book like this to explain it to me? A couple of quotes that I did like from there, like, he was very, very descriptive sometimes. So, describing one guy, he says, "A small, flat-nosed Jew raised his large head and regarded me with two fine growths of hair which luxuriated in either nostril. After a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in the half-darkness." So I thought that was kind of a humorous quote, describing the Jew. And then, I don't think, yeah, I didn't, oh yeah, one other quote that I had on there. Oh yeah, this is such a good quote, and so one good thing probably that made me give it 2 stars instead of 1 was this quote, which I will probably put on my Instagram. It says, "There was so much to read for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air." I feel like that perfectly describes how I feel every day. Like, I really want to be reading a lot, but also, like, the air is so beautiful, and I want to be out in it, so. But yeah, overall, I would not recommend Great Gatsby. Other people might tell you that they really like it, but if you trust my opinion and all, I don't think it's worth your time. And then my favorite book of the month was In the House of Tom Bombadil. So my dad bought this and read this last month, and I think it just came out last year. Yeah, it was just published last year. So this kind of, if you've read Lord of the Rings, you know that there's a character, Tom Bombadil, and he's this very mysterious character. No one really knows who he is, and C.S. Lewis specifically said that some things were just not meant to be found out. Like, there should be mysteries in books, but lots of people have come up with all these theories on who he is, and you can Google it and see all these different theories, but a lot of them kind of fall apart. So this guy, C.R. Wiley, he is a very intelligent man and knows so much about Tolkien. I was very impressed with that. And he kind of goes through and not only tries to explain who Tom Bombadil is, which I won't tell you because that would spoil it. He doesn't even tell you to the end of the book, so you don't want it to be spoiled. But not only does he go through who he thinks Tom Bombadil is, he also kind of goes through and just makes you appreciate so many things from Lord of the Rings, almost things that were like cultural back then, but we've kind of lost that as our culture has been dumbed down. So it talks about, like, master, like, what does a master even mean, and how Saruman is a picture of a bad master. He's just using people to get his ways. And then you have Tom Bombadil, who's a good master, and he's just, like, cultivating things and making them all work the way that they should be working. Then it talks about, like, music and words, and how we've kind of lost the meaning of words and the whole music all around us. We don't really experience that anymore, so that's a big part of the book. And yeah, he just goes through all these different things, talks a little bit about Goldberry. I feel like I need to read this book again already, because when I was reading it, my mind just felt so blown, and I was like, wow, I really want to read this again and just be able to absorb so much more, and it helped me to understand just the Tolkien books as a whole and make me want to read his whole, I can't remember what it's called, but his whole collection of all of his writings. I think that would be so amazing to read. So I really did enjoy it, In the House of Tom Bombadil, and if you have any interest in Tolkien or Lord of the Rings, I think you should really go read it. The Sinking City, I forgot. So this is by Christine Cohen. So last year I read The Winter King. We did that as a family read aloud, and I really enjoyed that in the second half. The first half was kind of disappointing, and then it finally, like, picked up, and it was a really good book. So we decided to try her new book, The Sinking City, and I did not like it, like, one bit. It was so weird throughout, and when people, you try to be original in a book and come up with, like, a different way to do magic or a different way to do this, and when people try to do that, sometimes they come up with really weird things that just, like, don't work. And so that's how I felt like this was, she was trying to come up with something new, and it just ended up being really weird, like the way that they did magic and everything. There was probably like 5 pages that I actually really enjoyed the story, and the ending was kind of a sweet ending, but it was weird. And then the whole book, you're kind of like, there's one problem they're trying to solve. You're building up to that the whole time. Then the climax is minuscule. You don't even realize that it was a good ending. And then the last, I don't know, maybe like 30 pages of the book, they're working to solve almost an entirely different problem and like wrap up all those strings, and it seems like they totally abandoned the main story. So I thought it was odd. And then as far as like how well it was written, we read it out loud, and it was a very, very difficult read aloud, just because the way it's written, it's from the first person, which very few authors do that because it's really difficult. So if you see someone reading The Sinking City, I did not like it at all. However, people I know and my family did have differing opinions on that, so there might be some comments that are disagreeing with me, so you can read it if you would like, but it was not my cup of tea. And then audiobook I listened to was A Time to Speak, and that's the second of the Out of Time series. I read the first one last month, and I think I liked this one better, which is weird because it's the second in a trilogy, and usually the middle book is not the best, but so far I really have liked this one the best. My sister told me that I wouldn't like it as much because it's a middle book, but I actually liked it a lot better than the first one. And there is one part where someone explains to another person, like, what does love mean to me? And if I say that I love you, what does that mean? And he has this amazing quote that literally I want to go find it and like print it off, just because it was so biblical and so good. Also, it was like pretty scary to see because the whole storyline is that people are basically just being brainwashed by the government and doing like whatever the government tells them to do. Oh, you should get this and then we can control your life. And no one's listening, and then there's the group that's trying to dissent and trying to kind of break apart everything that's going on. So it was kind of scary to like listen to it and realize that that's almost happening with some of the things going on in our government. So I thought that was interesting, just people refusing to believe the truth. So I did really like this one, and there is some really great like faith in this one, faith that she has in God. Again though, God talking to her and like giving her a certain like mission is even more prevalent in the second book than the first book, and that is just so annoying to me. It takes off, like it probably would have been a 5-star book for me, but that just kept coming up, and it's so pointless and weird, and I don't agree with it, so I did not like that part. And then the last audiobook and the last book this month that I actually just finished this morning was Whose Waves These Are by Amanda Dykes. And also my sister listened to this before I did, and she really enjoyed it and even like cried at some parts. So I was really excited going into this, but of course people have differing opinions and different things they like. And honestly, I think the thing that really threw me off for this book was the narrator was pretty terrible. I did not like the narrator at all. So that kind of just messed it up for me, because even in like the really emotional parts, you're just like, why is this lady talking like this? And then there was a lot of faith elements, and I did really like that. She was relying on God, trusting in Him. However, there was one part where God speaks to her and like tells her to turn around or something like that. So weird, didn't like that. And I did really like how the love story was portrayed, because a lot of books you're like inside the people's heads and you just get all these like weird thoughts that are going through their head, and this didn't really feel like that. You just got to a certain page and there's like a certain moment that happens and you're like, whoa, how did I all of a sudden just like really like these people? I didn't even realize it. And so I really enjoyed that part. There was a couple parts that were really sad. I was driving when I was listening to the part that was really sad, and I was like, I need to like pull over or something, because like I couldn't think and function because it was so like, oh no, what just happened? So yeah, I did enjoy it. I only ended up giving it 3.5 stars just because the narrator wasn't that great, and there was just overall it wasn't my favorite book. And again, that book is one of the like historical fiction, so it kind of tells one story of a family member, a grandpa, and then it also tells the story of modern day, the granddaughter trying to kind of figure out everything that's going on and bringing family back together. There were some really sweet parts just on family like losing each other and then meeting each other again and kind of having a happy ending. Those were all the books that I read in March, and I have a ton of books on my TBR for April. I bought a lot of books this month, so I can't wait to do kind of like a book haul type video. Will probably be next because I got a lot of books, so don't be peeking in the background trying to figure them out, but those will definitely be on my TBR. And let's see, what am I reading? Oh, I'm reading Persuasion right now, and Josiah's Reformation, so I kind of want to add more books, but it's also really nice to only be reading two. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video, and I'd like to know what book did you read this month and what was your favorite one, because even though I have like over 100 books on my want to read, I can always add more, and I really like to know what y'all are reading and see y'all's differing opinions on books. I think that's what's so cool about reading books, is so many people have different opinions, and it's really cool to see like why do you like it or why do you not. So if y'all want to chat down in the comments, I'll always read your comments, and of course I'll always be on Instagram ready to talk to you guys. So I will see you next week. Bye!